All right, it's back. President's Day edition, Monday Night Josh, Word of Josh, and we are back. And it's going to be an exciting show tonight because with me tonight to talk baseball for the first time on this podcast in a long time. The last time I talked baseball was probably 2 or 3 years ago when I did a review of the Orioles from 1988 to like 1998. And we haven't really talked about it since. So I am super excited to have with me the Centennial legend himself, the 1996 Homecoming King, the one and only Walt Florio. Walt, welcome to Word of Josh. It is a pleasure indeed to have you on and have you here. And we've been talking about doing this show for a long time. So welcome. Glad to have you here.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Very excited.
Very exciting indeed. It's with Word of Josh, we've done a lot of football. And you're the first guest that I've ever really brought on board to do baseball. So again, really excited to get your expertise and hear what you have to say, because baseball season is right around the corner, thankfully, because I know for me, when the Super Bowl ended last week, I almost started crying. Once football ends for me, football is my thing. So for football to be done, it's great to be able to transition into baseball and to be here with you, because you might be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Oriole fan that I know. And you have been an Oriole fan the entire time I've known you, which probably goes back to like 1989, maybe, I think, is when we first met back in the old days of Dunlogan Middle School. And so I'm super excited. So let's just get into it. The Orioles pitchers and catchers report in 3 days, I think, at this point, the end of this week.
Oh yeah, end of this.
What's that?
I was just saying, end of this week, pitchers and catchers are definitely reporting.
End of this week, pitchers and catchers are coming out, and it's going to be exciting. I think it's going to be something for the Orioles, because this is year 3 of the Mike Elias process. And I know fans are getting impatient, but you're a student of baseball. You understand baseball. Talk a little bit about what's been going on the last couple years, and maybe kind of, just at a high level, what to expect this year.
Well, about July of 2018, the team decided to go into a hard rebuild, which is basically where you trade off basically every single asset that you have that you can get prospects for and start from the ground up. We were like dead last in farm system rankings at the time. And you just basically want to acquire as much talent as you can and develop them and build from the ground up, which is basically a necessity for a team like the Orioles in a division with huge spenders like the Yankees and the Red Sox. The Orioles need to take an approach more similar to what Tampa does.
Build the farm system, grow and develop. Now, let me ask you this, though, because a lot of times what you see with a team like Tampa, and then what you saw with what used to be the Florida Marlins, now the Miami Marlins, is they'd build the team up, they'd win a Super Bowl, and then as soon as it's over, they break it apart. Is Elias trying to go with that model, that concept?
I don't think so. I think Baltimore is in a market that they're a little bit bigger spender than what Tampa would be. Even back when we were winning a few years ago, Angelos proved that he'll spend some money when the team is good and ready to win. I think that if we do it the right way, that we can build up and pay the right people and be a long-term successful team.
Yeah, it seems like the model that Elias is building the entire organization, and then you don't have to sign all 9, players in the field and 3 or 4 of your starting pitchers to these huge contracts. It's you want to have a constant talent pool moving in, and then you want to keep certain guys, but you're going to have to move on, which, if you really look at the Yankees in the early part of their dynasty in the mid to late 90s, I mean, that's really what the Yankees were doing. The early part of their dynasty in 90 starting really in 96, but that team really started in 94. They really were a young team that built from within, and they only got into the crazy spending probably around like 2001 when they had traded so many pieces of their farm system to win now. During that 5 or 6 year stretch, they kind of almost had to spend money to stay competitive. But even the Yankees, I don't feel like are trying to spend as much as they once did per capita, of course.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that you say that because when the Yankees started spending, since that point in time, they've actually only won one World Series in 2009. And like they had come off of a run where they had won four in a row when they were building through the farm system and had all that talent that they were bringing up. And Elias actually comes from, he started out with the Cardinals, who, if you look back, they had Albert Pujols, who was like one of the all-time greats, and they let him walk because their farm system was so deep. And they had young, cheap talent that they could bring up to replace him and use money to bring in free agents and stuff to build around their young talent.
Yeah, and Elias kind of learned from the best, right? I mean, he's no dummy. He understands how to build an organization from top to bottom. He got to see how the Cardinals did it. He spent a lot of years in Houston. And I mean, he brought in a NASA rocket scientist with him to really help build out the Orioles uh, talent development system, incorporating analytics, expanding international scouting. Um, oh God, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name. This is embarrassing. What's
Sig
that?
Mejdal is the
Sig Mejdal, thank
yep,
you. I for some reason Sid Fernandez was on my tongue, and it was like it was 25 years ago when El Cid came to
yep.
town. Yeah, Sig Mejdal. So I mean, this is not this is a talented front office that has a plan. And what I have been impressed with is while look, I think we're all as fans we're impatient, right? I mean, the Orioles haven't been really competitive since 2016, and the great Buck meltdown in Toronto with Ubaldo Jimenez coming in out of the bullpen while Zach Britton's sitting there in a situation where it probably would have made sense to bring in Britton versus Ubaldo, and it seems like that it just fell apart from there. And we knew that was coming, right? 2017 kind of seemed like, that's when Chris Davis really was starting to fall apart. And we'll get to Davis in a minute. But that's where it was kind of the beginning of the end for Buck, wasn't it? Right up there in Toronto. And then, 2017, they didn't get it done. And now here we are.
Yeah, honestly, I think that move with leaving Britton in the bullpen is kind of where Buck lost the team a little bit. And the following year in 2017, we still had a lot of talent, but we underperformed. And then 2018, we were on pace to be like one of the worst teams in history. And that's when they decided to
Blow
go
the
with
whole
the,
thing up.
yep.
Yeah, and that was interesting because with Manny Machado, they kept Machado at the beginning of that season, which a lot of people look at as a mistake. I'm curious, when you go back and look at the Machado trade, do you obviously we can't go back and say, well, if we would have traded him prior to 2018 or even at the 2017 trade deadline, maybe we could have gotten it better. But looking at Manny Machado, when we traded him right before the trade deadline in July of 2018, do you think the Orioles got an appropriate haul, if you will, for Manny Machado? And did that set the foundation for the future, or is that just one in the long lines of many Orioles trades that hasn't worked out over the years? And it's hard to tell when you trade a superstar for prospects, but what's your take on that?
I honestly loved the Manny Machado trade for when we made it. We got pitcher named Dean Kramer, who made his debut with the Orioles last season. He pitched amazing in the minors for us in 2018 and 2019. And when he got called up last year, he was very successful during his four starts. We also got a right fielder named Uziel Diaz, who was one of their top outfield prospects. He's
He was
been
in
a little bit
Double A
injury.
last year, right?
What's that?
He was double A last year, right? He was down in
Yeah,
Bowie.
he's in Double A Bowie right now. He's been a little bit injury prone, but when he's been on the field, he's had a pretty decent amount of success. He's got a five tool set and could could end up being a really quality player for us. We got a utility infielder named Rylan Bannon in the deal, who's hit 300 at every level for us since he's been acquired. He might actually make a debut this year as well as a utility fielder for us. Then we got Zach Pop, who we unfortunately just lost in the Rule 5 draft. He was a reliever who had Tommy John last year, and I guess they decided because he was coming back from the surgery not to protect him, and we lost him in the Rule 5 draft.
Mm. So do you think that was a move where they didn't protect him because they didn't think anyone would take him because of the surgery?
That's my guess. I think that they left him unprotected because of the Tommy John surgery recovery.
Now, with that though, he has to doesn't he have to be on the 25-man rotation or the 25-man roster and then be offered back if he's not, or if he's on the DL, then that's kind of a free pass for another team.
He has to be on the roster for the entire year, and if they decide to try to send him back to the or not have him on the roster, they have to send him back to the Orioles. And if he
What
goes on the DL, then what happens is it's like pauses the clock, and it has to be picked up the following year when he comes back. They have to keep him on the roster for the remaining number of days, which is actually what happened with the Orioles when they acquired Anthony Santander through the Rule
right.
5 draft. Yep.
Yep. Look at me calling it the disabled list. Isn't it the injured list now?
Now it's the injured list. Yes.
Yeah, they changed that a couple years ago, if I recall.
Yeah, which I don't really get the name change, but it's
Well, I mean, I think you want to be. I assume it's with everything that goes on with political correctness, but we're not gonna
not
go
the
down that
yeah,
rabbit hole. That's a whole nother podcast
yeah,
for a whole nother brand. Because
yeah.
I'm not, as I said a couple weeks ago, I'm not touching politics. We're here to have fun and talk sports. So I'm gonna go back a little bit though. We touched on 2016 in that year. And I want to get your take before we look at the future. We definitely have to look at a little bit of the sins of the past. And when you're talking Orioles and you're talking sins of the past, there's nothing we can talk about any greater of a sin of the past than the Chris Davis contract. I'm not going to call Chris Davis a sin of the past because you look at some of the things Davis has accomplished. He was the American League MVP in 2013. He led the league in all sorts of offensive categories. And in 2015, I believe he led the league with 47 home runs. So at the time, a big contract made sense. And while a lot of fans today definitely have selective memory, a lot of people in this town were happy that Angelos supposedly overrode the GM and signed Davis to what now has to be one of the worst free agent contracts in sports history, giving Davis a 7-year, $161 million contract. And not that the contract itself or the money is so ridiculous, it's the absolute lack of production and return of investment that the Orioles have gotten for Davis.
Yeah, I don't think anybody could have really seen the level to which he would drop off. I mean, like you're saying, he was really good for a long stretch of time, really from 2012 through 2016. He was putting up really good numbers, and then to think he would drop off to being one of the worst 5-year stretches, if not the worst in Major League Baseball history.
Yeah.
Nobody could have really seen that coming.
And his power just disappeared.
Yeah. And but like they say, hindsight is 2020. At the time the contract was okay. I mean, you really want to get into it. 2015, we actually could have probably traded him at the deadline and gotten a really nice haul for him when we weren't really a playoff contending team at that time. But instead, they decided to add in Gerardo Parra, who wasn't really that great of a acquisition, and trade away a couple of our prospects for him. So I mean, we probably could have traded him at that time, but we didn't. And in the off season, signing him was probably the smartest thing that we could have done. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out.
Didn't we also sign another bat around that same time? God, I'm doing horrible on my. If this were football, I could have told you who the free agent was on the bench. But we had another power hitter we signed to like a 3-year deal. I keep wanting to say his name was
JJ
Mark.
Hardy, we signed to a 3-year deal at like 39
No, not
million. We signed
JJ
Mark
Hardy.
Trumbo to
Who's that?
pick in Mark Trumbo.
Trumbo. Thank you.
Yeah.
God, this holiday, it's killing me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Trumbo. We signed him, kind of the same player as Davis, right? Just a little cheaper, but also another contract that didn't really pay off.
Right. I mean, he had a really good 2016 when we first signed or first got him, and then we signed him to a 3-year contract at the end of that season, and he was just like Davis, dropped off and really didn't perform. Same
Right.
thing with like JJ Hardy when we gave him a big contract. His second one, he dropped off a lot. Really, the only one that earned the contract was Adam Jones, if you go back and think about it.
Yeah, and Adam Jones was still young enough at the time where that contract made sense. And I want to share, because I everyone who listens to me knows I love the business of baseball. So listen to this deal that Davis signed. So it's 7 years, $161 million. So it started in for the 2016 season. Now the contract pays him $23 million a season, but $6 million per year is deferred. So in present day dollars, the Orioles only have to pay out to him only $17 million a season. So he's completed 5 years. I don't think enough people recognize there's still 2 years left at 17 million a season. So Davis is still owed $34 million. And I think a lot of people want to know, well, why aren't the Orioles just cutting him? And while I get that, I do think somewhere in the back of the ownership's mind, and look, I'm not a fan of Peter Angelo's the owner, but based on everything I've heard, at his age, he's in his 90s. He is not well medically, so I'm not gonna be saying anything negative about him other than as an owner, I don't think he's been a good owner. But at this point, his sons, John and Lou, are definitely running the franchise at this point while his health is failing. But you kind of have to look at this contract and say, well, I can understand why they're not going to write a guy a check for $34 million and send him on his way. I think they feel like, well, no one's going to make a trade for him, right? There's no one in baseball who's even offering a sack of baseballs for Chris Davis. Because if the Orioles trade him, maybe they pick up some sort of mid-level prospect, but the Orioles are going to have to eat 15 of the 17 million maybe per year. So I kind of get why they're not shipping him off, thinking, well, we got to pay him anyway. What if he can refine the magic?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand from a business standpoint why they wouldn't want to just lose $34 million. I mean, that's a lot of money that they're spending
Right.
to have him on the roster. And they're probably just hoping that he can catch lightning in a bottle and
Get a little bit of trade value.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or if he doesn't, there maybe they'll luck out and he'll retire before his contract ends up. But that's not going to happen. I mean,
there ain't no way with $23 million guaranteed.
Yeah.
They say don't ever say ever. I'm saying never. My favorite is reading fans who are like, if he were a team player, he'd retire. And I'm like, would you retire? Because I wouldn't. I mean, they could give me that contract today. They might get as much production out of Chris Davis with me. And I'm not walking away from that if they offer it. I'll take the 23 million and say, hey, this is how it goes. But with Davis's contract, listen to this craziness. So the contract ends after the 2022 season. So he's going to make 17 million this year. Whether the Orioles trade him, cut him, or play him, he's getting 17 million. He's getting 17 million last year. Then from the year 2023 to 2032, when he is either retired or playing in the independent league, because he's not going to be on a major league roster unless something crazy happens, he's going to get $3.5 million per year from the Orioles every year. So that's $35 million over 10 years. And then from 2033 to 2037, he's getting $1.4 million a year for 5 years. I mean, now granted, the only place that I'll say maybe his agents failed him was they didn't get any interest on that deferred money. So from a business standpoint, the Orioles, they got to hold off on to 6 million a year, which they could then get to, take that $42 million. And if you look at it from 2016, they got to defer the first 6 million installment, and they're going to pay that last $42 million out over 15 years. And if everything I've read is correct, that's not adjusted for inflation. There's no interest on it. So for the Orioles, that's a pretty good business deal. But for the flip side on Davis, you could say, hey, he didn't get any interest or anything like that, but he got a $42 million pension plan.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that he's going to be losing any meals over not getting interest over a 42 million pension plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it really, you think of the Bobby Bonilla contract, which is, has to be the greatest deal any agent's ever constructed, because Bobby Bonilla deferred $5.9 million in salary. I think it was back in 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. And then from 2010 to like 2035, it's for 25 years. He gets like $1.6 million a year or something ridiculous like that from the Mets every year. And all he gets it on July 1st of every year. And sports fans now celebrate it as Bobby Bonilla Day, because we're just getting to the point of the halfway point. And when that's done paying Bonilla, he'll be 73 when he gets his last check. You want to talk about a pension plan that was brilliant. And I've heard people say, well, if he would have taken the $5.9 million and invested it in himself and blah, 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 blah. And maybe that's true. If you just take a look at what average rate of investment returns are, yeah, Bonilla may have done better. But here's the thing. There was a market crash in the 2000s. There was the housing in the early 2000s. Then you had the housing crisis where the bubble burst, and you had, everything that happened with Bernie Madoff and Lehman Brothers. And so many people, like Bobby Bonilla could have been like Kurt Schilling and lost everything.
Yep.
So for people to say, well, it was a bad deal for Bonilla, it was a brilliant deal for Bonilla, because it put the onus on a Major League Baseball franchise, which, unless something very crazy happened, was not going out of business. And now Bonilla for 25 years is making $1.6 million a year. And all he has to do is show up at like a Mets minor league camp and talk to prospects one time a year. I do that for $1.6 million in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So
definitely a brilliant contract on his part, because like you're saying, a lot of other stuff is very uncertain. This is it's a guaranteed 1.6 million every July 1st.
Every July 1st. I need someone in my life who can negotiate a deal like that for me. And Chris Davis now is getting a little benefit of that, right? He's going to get $42 million paid out to him over 15 years. And so you heard the numbers. I mean, $3.5 million a year for the first 10 years, and then $1.4 million. I mean, good for him. Glad for him. It stinks being an Oriole fan that all that money's tied up, but in sports where you constantly hear people talking about how it's a business, he's one of the ones who got over on ownership, right? I mean, he truly, maybe at the time of the contract, he should have gotten it, but rate of return, you look at it, it's one of the worst contracts in baseball history.
Yeah, I mean, production wise, from what they got for it, it's definitely the worst contract imaginable on the Orioles standpoint. But when you're giving the person the contract, you're giving it on past performance. You're not giving it on future. Because I mean, obviously, if he stunk in the past, he wouldn't be getting
Right.
$161 million.
But you don't give a contract like that if you believe, like when the Orioles signed him to that contract, they believed they were going to get the Chris Davis that they saw leading up to that contract. Like even when he had a down year in 2014, or sorry,
Now, 2014,
20,
you're right.
2014, he still slugged a lot of home runs. So even though his average was low, he still slugged a ton of home runs. And I remember he got particularly hot late in the stretch, and then he got suspended for 25
Right before
games.
the playoffs. Yep.
Yeah, good timing.
Yeah, which is
So, yeah.
that's kind of why I didn't want him back at the time of 2016, but I understood why they were giving him the contract.
Yeah, I understood that too. But man, in 2014, I was pissed.
Yeah, that team could have won the World Series, but unfortunately, Machado got injured and then Davis got suspended,
Yep. Yep.
and we didn't have the offensive firepower and lost a bunch of one-run games to the Royals.
Right. And the Royals were a good team. I won't take anything away from them. They were a good team, but you take a rising superstar in Machado and Chris Davis, you put those two bats in your lineup against the Royals, you could be looking at a much different outcome.
Yep. No, I
So,
definitely believe that we most likely would have been in the World Series and possibly even beat the Giants had things not happened the way that they did with the injury and the suspension.
so as we transition and look towards the future, talk to me a minute. Obviously, we moved on from Buck Showalter. What were your thoughts on Buck?
I think that Buck is good for like a rebuilding team, but I think that he only tends to take teams to a certain level. And once they get to a point where the next step is needed to be taken, that he doesn't tend to get teams to that level because I think he's too loyal to some of his players and doesn't make changes that need to be made. Like he'll stick with veterans that are struggling or bat somebody high in the lineup that needs to be dropped in the lineup.
Right. Yeah, he plays that. But like you said, I mean, that 2014 team could have won the World Series. I don't blame them not winning the World Series on Buck Showalter that year. In
No,
fact, I actually thought he was brilliant that year.
yeah, he's great, and he definitely could have. That was his best chance to win the World Series in 2014. The back end of our bullpen was dynamic. Our offense was really good. Unfortunately, injuries just derailed us.
Yeah. Yeah, they sure did. So we moved on from Buck, and we moved on from Dan Duquette. Dan Duquette, it's weird. Early in his tenure, I thought Dan Duquette was doing a lot of good things, but then it really started to feel like, even around 2014, it started to feel like, man, we're making some trades here, and we're really putting a risk in the future. And the other thing that bothered me about that time was there was a lot of young pitching talent within the organization, whether it's Jake Arrieta, Brian Mattis, Dylan Bundy, and there were several others. But you think about some of those arms that we had in the system that Andy McPhail really brought in, and maybe even Duquette contributed to a little bit, but we were never able to develop those guys. And a lot of that's on Buck and his overall coaching staff and the way that the staff was doing things, how they were fudging with certain parts of Jake Arrieta's mechanics, and he's been pretty outspoken about that. Um, do you see differences now under Mike Elias and how they're developing pitching and what Brandon Hyde? I'm not sure Brandon Hyde is gonna, and I think Brandon Hyde knows this. I'm not sure Brandon Hyde's gonna be the one to take the Orioles to the next level. I could be wrong, but I think Brandon Hyde knows he's here to really be a teacher and to develop. And then when it comes time to contend, the Orioles might move on.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you on Duquette. I think that he made a lot of trades and stuff that were actually not beneficial to the organization at all. Like in 2015, when we weren't really a playoff contender, he dealt away prospects for mediocre players like Gerardo Parra. He traded away prospects for mediocre players like Travis Snyder. He gave up draft picks to sign aging back end of the rotation at best starting pitchers like Giovanni Gallardo. I just think he made a lot of moves that kind of made it to the reason why our farm system dropped all the way down to dead last in baseball. I think that there's a
quickly.
yeah, I think that there's a major difference with Elias. I think that he's focused on building the organization from the ground up and developing the players as they come up. I mean, if you look at guys that he drafted when he was in Houston, these are like superstars like Carlos Correa, and he brought in players like Altuve, and he's doing similar things here with the Orioles. I mean, like our pitching in the minor leagues has been fantastic since 2018 when he took over, and you you can actually see them taking strides and improving at every level as they go up, and it's very exciting to witness.
So let's talk a little bit about the future here. We talked about Manny Machado quite a bit, and obviously we traded him to the Dodgers in 2018, and then he since signed a mega contract with the Padres, and good for him. I mean, good for Manny. Manny wanted to get paid. Manny was going to get paid, and Manny got paid. It's a shame that he's not here. I think Baltimore would have embraced Machado for his career. I think the one thing that this town loves are players that they can call. Baltimore loves players that they can call their own. Cal Ripken. Baltimore loved Eddie Murray, and it wasn't Eddie Murray so much wanting to leave at the time he did, so much as he had issues with the media, but the fans adored Eddie and were thrilled that Eddie came back. You can look at the Ravens and look at what Ray Lewis meant to Baltimore and Ed Reed, Terrell Suggs, Joe Flacco, different guys who have meant a lot. And I think Flacco, and we're not going to pivot too much to football, but I have a little football fix. I think Lamar Jackson slowly becoming one of those guys that's a Baltimore hero, but I think Baltimore is dying for a baseball player and star to call their own and someone who can be here for the long haul. When you look at the Orioles farm system, is that guy here yet?
I believe that the guy is here. We have a catcher that we drafted #1 in the draft last season named Adley Rutschman, who is currently the second best prospect in all of baseball. I mean, I agree with you on Machado. Machado, talent-wise, is probably the best player that the Orioles have had in decades. Probably talent-wise, even better than Ripken. But unfortunately, the Orioles botched the contract negotiations to buy out arbitration with them when they were only like $10 million apart. They could have bought out 4 years of his arbitration and extended control. And then they just let things go to the point where he became too expensive for the Orioles and they had to trade him. But I believe that Rutschman is the real deal. I think he's a catcher that is amazing behind the plate, calls a great game, throws out base runners. He can hit for average from both sides of the plate. He's got power. I think he's going to be the real deal once he gets up here. And it's very exciting for him to be catching all this young, very talented pitching that we have in the system.
Does it kind of remind you of Matt Wieters and how things were with Wieters when he was coming up and we had all these young pitchers? And Wieters was a great player. I think a lot of Baltimore loved him, but I think Wieters never developed into the bat that everyone thought he was going to, the whole Mauer with power type thing. But does Rutschman kind of remind you of a Matt Wieters?
Yes and no. I mean, in terms of the hype level and stuff like that, I believe that that's kind of equivalent, but I think that Rutschman is actually a better defensive catcher than Wieters was.
Really?
Yes, man, he's really good behind the plate.
Weren't you the one who coined the phrase "Thou shalt not run on Wieters"?
Yes.
Wasn't that your phrase very early?
Yes, I love Matt Wieters' defense, but I think that Rutschman's even better.
No kidding.
Yeah,
That's exciting.
yeah.
What about at the plate? What's Rutschman's bat like in terms of what's he going to bring to the lineup?
He's a switch hitter that basically he's a he hits the ball in the gap a lot. He doesn't really swing for the fences, but he can hit a lot of home runs because he just makes solid contact, tries to hit the ball up the middle, and it's a heck of a hitter. He hits from both sides of the plate. I think we're getting the real deal. I mean, obviously, only time will tell once he makes his way up to Baltimore, but I'm excited for him.
Do you think he makes the big league roster this year?
This year, no, I think it's going to be next year when he comes up here. I think that if we had a legitimate season last year with him being able to play in the minor leagues all year, that he would have been up this year. But I believe they'll wait until next year to bring him up,
And what about like a September call
which
up?
is
Is that
actually
possible?
fine by me. Like I'd like
Sorry.
him to maybe catch some of our top pitching prospects down in the minors that like Bowie, bring up like DL Hall up to Bowie and let them kind of build a chemistry in the minor leagues before they get up to the majors.
That makes sense. Do you think Rutschman gets a September call up?
Possibly. I mean, if he does get called up, I think it will be late in the year where he might get a cup of coffee. I'm not sure they're going to want to start his service clock that early. I mean, but I think it'll probably be either beginning of next year. They might even wait until like May of next year just to get the extra year of service time with him.
Talk to me about service
Because the
time.
way that
How did
works out is if you
you're good.
spend a certain number of days on the roster for the year, it burns off one of your service years and you become a free agent a year earlier. So like if they're
Whoa. Oh boy. Looks like we had some technical difficulty and lost Walt. So hopefully
sorry, I
he'll
think I lost
yeah, we lost you for a sec. You
my back.
back?
All right, I think I'm back. I don't know what happened, but
You went
as I was
gone
saying,
for a minute.
if you yeah, I think I lost connection for a second, but back in here now. But what happens is if you don't get called up until May, then you don't have enough service time during the regular season to have that year count towards your 6 years before free agency, and the team gets an extra full season with them.
Oh wow. Yes, that makes so that could be a good reason why not to bring him up in September. Because is it by day or is it by game? Like, how does that work? And does it add up? So if you
It's
do
by
30 games
day,
this
and it
year,
rolls over from year.
rolls over year to year.
Yeah, if he did 30 games, yes. So if he did 30 games this year, that would take 30 days off of his service time for next year. That would be required for the year to count his free agency period.
Got it. So you have to really then do some serious math for next year. Whoop, we lost him again. Oh boy, we seem to be having this is the beauty with live feeds, folks. We're losing Walt a little bit,
Yeah.
having some live feed issues, but hey, this is the beauty of quote live TV, right?
Yes. Gotta love live TV.
There you go. All right, Walt. So chat me up a little bit. Talk to me a little bit more. What's in the Orioles farm system right now that fans have to be excited about, particularly pitching? We've talked a lot about pitching, and you've talked a lot about Rutschman catching these young pitchers. Talk to us about some of the prospects in the Orioles farm system and what O's fans have to look forward to. Did I lose you again? Oh boy. Well, we seem to be having some feed issues with Walt. Seems to be Walt, you there? Seem to be having those connection issues. So we'll let Walt try to reconnect and come back. But what I was starting to bring up was the Orioles farm system and some of the different pitching prospects. You back?
Yeah, I'm back.
All right.
I'm
So
back again.
what I was saying is
All
we
right.
lost you.
Well,
Talk about the
obviously, pitching is
pitching
our
prospects. Yeah.
deepest part of the farm system. We got probably a good 20 starting pitchers that could potentially be guys that make it up to the major leagues. Last year, Bowie had pretty much 6 starters in their rotation that could all be guys that are major league quality starting pitchers, starting with Dean Kramer, who made his debut in Baltimore last season. They had a guy named Michael Bauman who actually threw a no-hitter for them, and he's got amazing stuff, strikes out a ton of guys, got high velocity, 4 quality pitches. They have a guy named Alex Wells who is a control pitcher, hardly ever walks batters, great ERA, pitches ground ball pitcher. They had a guy named Zach Lowther who has 4 quality pitches, not the fastest.
Oy. We seem to be losing Walt quite a bit tonight with the connection issues. So I don't think it's on this end. It appears to be on his. So we're gonna give this one more shot. And
Yeah. All right, here we go. Back again. Hopefully this time for good. They got but Zach Lowther, he's really controls his pitches. They have actually a Towson alum named Bruce Zimmerman. They got him in the trade for Kevin Gausman. He's probably going to be more of a bullpen arm once he gets into Baltimore. He made his debut last year. I think he's going to be a long reliever with Baltimore. And even Cody Sedlock, who was a first-round draft pick for us years ago, had a lot of injury problems, but last year he really had a bounce-back year under Elias and company's tutelage and development, and he was very successful last year. And if you get down to the lower levels, we have 3 guys who are top of the rotation possible starters in Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall, and Drew Rom. These guys all have upper 90s fastballs. Their breaking pitches are great. Their strikeout rates are amazing. That's one thing that I actually like about our pitching is we have a lot of guys who can strike out hitters to the tune of 10, 11, 12 strikeouts per 9 innings, which really helps in a sandbox stadium like Camden Yards that they have that kind of success in the major leagues.
the home run derby stadium that Camden Yards can be.
Yes.
Talk to me about Grayson Rodriguez. Is he someone who could potentially be that quote unquote ace?
Yes, he's the best pitching prospect in the Orioles system. I think right now he's currently ranked about 35th in all of baseball. His stuff is electric. I mean, upper 90s fastball, got a really good changeup, really good breaking pitch. His stuff is really nasty. He's got good control of his pitches. I mean, he's pretty much been unhittable the first 2 levels that he's pitched at. I'm really excited to see what he does this year as he gets into possibly Bowie. Maybe even if he has a really good year at Bowie, they might even move him up to AAA, and we'll see what he does. But yeah.
Yeah, everything I'm reading about him says he's got 3 really good pitches and he's working on his changeup. And they think, and the word is, if he can really get that changeup to be a 4th pitch, like you said, he could be the guy. Have the Orioles had a true ace since Mike Messina left town back in 2001?
No, true ace, no. And they've had a couple of solid pitchers like Chris Tillman, but nothing like a true ace.
Yeah.
But Grayson Rodriguez and even DL Hall, if he can get his control issues to improve a little bit, they have true ace material on their arms and can definitely be guys that are 1 and 2 in the rotation for many years here in Baltimore.
Talk to me about Heston Kierstad. What do you know, if I'm pronouncing his name right? What do you know about him? He's the second overall pick in last year's draft.
I actually was not a huge fan of that pick. I wanted them to take the kid out of Vanderbilt, who I think is a little bit better hitter, but Kierstad has a lot of power, and I think that's what they liked about him. He's got a swing that is built for hitting balls out on Utah Street. So I think that's kind of why they took him. But
yeah, I think those 37 home runs and only 595 college at bats really stuck out for them with him. But is this the right staff? Is Brandon Hyde and his team of coaches and Michael Elias, is this the type of guy they think they could turn into that guy? He may not hit for average, but maybe he bats 240, 250 and slugs you 40 home runs a year. Is that the goal?
I think that's kind of going, if he ends up being a successful major league player, I do think that that's going to be the kind of hitter that he is, the guy that can hit 240 with a bunch of bombs like Chris Davis before the
before he forgot how to hit.
Yeah.
What about Ryan Mountcastle? I mean, I feel like we've been hearing this guy's name forever, but he's 23, so it can't have been that long. It's probably just more so the Orioles haven't been that good. So you're looking every view of hope that you got. What's the thought on Mountcastle? Is this the year he finally starts on with the big league club?
We actually got called up last year. He played the last half of last season, and he hit over 300 and hitting home runs. Mountcastle is a guy that can absolutely rake. I actually like Mountcastle a lot more than Kjerstad. I think that Mountcastle is a guy that's going to be a great major league hitter. I don't know if his defense is going to be great, but if you can hit like Mountcastle can hit, you don't need to be great defensively. They can hide him at certain positions.
Right. Anyone can catch a ball at first base at the big league level, and in any case, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
But Mountcastle, I think, is going to be a very, very good hitter. I think that we have a kid named Gunnar Henderson who's going to be a really good hitter once he gets up here. He was actually their second round draft pick the year that we drafted Rutschman in the first round. He's another guy that I think will be a really good position player. We have a couple of younger guys in Delmarva. One's named Adam Hall, who is a speedster. He hits like 340 for Delmarva. Not a lot of power, but fields pretty good and has great speed, gets on base, steals bases. Kind of reminds me a little bit of a young Brian Roberts.
Brian Roberts.
Yep.
Another great contract we gave. It's like we wrote him a check and said, go right to the injured list, young man.
Yeah. Except his was kind of his own doing, hitting himself in the head with the baseball bat when he.
Yeah, that wasn't the smartest idea. That and Gus Frerott's infamous helmet shot at the first year at FedEx Field when he just rammed his head into the wall. The fact that you have some of these guys who do these things and the I won't say Gus Frerotte sabotaged his career, but you do have to question Brian Roberts with that infamous hitting himself in the helmet with a bat.
Yeah, it's
what a crazy move. But I tell you, it's exciting to hear the Orioles with this deep of a farm system. I mean, I'm excited about Tyler Nevin, the kid who can play first or third. He's 23 already, but he obviously has got a chance this year to get up to Baltimore at third base. I'd like to see him more at Bowie, but what do you know about Tyler Nevin?
Nevin is actually, like you said, he's pretty exciting young player. We got him back in the Michael Gibbons trade last season, along with another player named Terran Vavra, who is a shortstop, who I actually think is a little bit better than Nevin. But Nevin is a guy who I think is going to be a pretty quality hitter once he gets up. I'm excited to see what he does in our system once he gets into Bowie this year, and hopefully he can make his way on up to Baltimore. And we've actually gotten quite a few guys recently that are close to major league ready in these trades. When we traded Castro, we got a pitcher named Kevin Smith, who's really good. One of the Mets. He was one of the Mets' top pitchers in the organization. Lefty with quality stuff. We got a guy named Kyle Bradish from the Angels in the Dylan Bundy trade. Another guy with really good stuff that I'm excited to see what he does in our system. We just even in like the Cobb trade recently, the Angels gave us a guy who's basically major league ready at second base. We might see him as our starting second baseman opening day this year, and I'm excited to see what he can do. He's got really good speed. He can even play center field in a pinch. So it's definitely exciting. Some of the guys that we're getting back in these deals. I think Elias is excellent at his trading skills, and
He seems to know what he wants, right? He seems to have a system in place, um, and how they make trades and the type of player they bring in. I mean, they're not looking to get. I mean, they're realistic. He's realistic too, right? Every guy you trade for isn't going to be a future Hall of Famer. You've got to have guys who fit in, those role players, utility players, and you've got to build all that all throughout your franchise. So every trade isn't going to be a future Hall of Famer. Sometimes you're making a trade because you say, all right, this is a guy we can put in our system for 2 years and school him up, and then we can get 5 or 6 major league seasons out of him in a variety of different roles. So everyone's not going to be an everyday starter.
no, absolutely. And that's why you also want to have the deep farm system depth that you're talking about, because not every one of these prospects is going to make it up. I mean, I could list 20 pitchers in the Orioles systems that has quality stuff, but that doesn't mean that we're going to have 20 guys panning out in the major league level. But depth in their system is always good, just because it gives you more chances of finding that player that's going to be the guy that is on your major league roster and contributing.
Now, do you think this year's club, is this the year everything comes together for the O's, or are we still a year or two away from that, where this team is really starting to look like a team that could contend?
Uh, that can contend. I don't think that's going to come this year. I think that we'll see another step forward. I think that this team could win maybe 70 to 74 games, depending on how our young pitching does. They brought in guys like King Felix and Matt Harvey. It'll be interesting to see if they can maybe take some of the younger guys that are on the roster under their wings and tutor them. I would love to have Felix Hernandez tutoring some of these guys and showing them what it's like to be a successful major league pitcher, start in and start out. And
Yeah, I'm glad you brought those two up too, because look, we're not getting Matt Harvey or Felix Hernandez, King Felix, as he's eloquently referred to. We're not getting those guys in their prime where Hernandez is going to be contending for a Cy Young. But I feel like the Orioles are kind of taking, a page out of history a little bit. This is an Orioles move. They did it back in 1993 when they brought in a 34-year-old Fernando Valenzuela, and gave him one last cup of coffee. And Valenzuela had a couple of good months that season. He couldn't go the whole way. And I feel like the Orioles, if they can get a little bit of that from these two guys, they're going to eat up some innings and they're going to help. They may not get the results that they want, or that as fans we'd want, which would be a lot more wins. But I think you've got guys that you pointed out who can teach these kids how to be professional big league pitchers and how to prepare and how to go about their business and and succeed at this level. They may not be able to get the job done anymore on a consistent level that they once did. But it's a win-win deal, because what if they can? What if out of nowhere one of these two finds the lightning in the bottle that you mentioned before, and at the trade deadline has 9 or 10 wins, and the Orioles could then maybe even turn that around to a contender and get a couple more prospects for a team that's looking to get that piece that can maybe put them over the top.
yeah, I mean, and they might not even get that just out of the pitching. And we just signed a guy in Freddie Galvis to play
Right.
shortstop this year that it's a quality major league player, and if he has a good first half of the season, we might be able to flip that into another prospect or two.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Is there anyone on this Orioles club that you think is trade bait at the deadline by the deadline? Is there someone on this roster you think, come hell or come high water, Mike Elias is going to send them off?
Um, it really depends on how some of those guys are doing production wise. I could see like Galvis, or I could see a King Felix, or maybe a Matt Hardy. I mean, he turned freaking Tommy Malone into two prospects last offseason, so who knows?
Right.
Maybe, yeah.
Right. Well, hey, Eric DaCosta turned a backup kicker into a 5th-round draft pick. So all
Yeah.
you need is one buyer, right?
Yeah.
Well, talk to me a little bit about Hunter Harvey. Or is this kid done? Are the Baltimore Oriole fans ever going to be, and no knock on Hunter Harvey. He's obviously had a slew of, unfortunate incidents. And anytime you have to go down Tommy John surgery, a lot of things can happen. But will the Oriole faithful, do you think they get rewarded for their patience with Hunter Harvey, even if it's as like a closer or someone in the bullpen?
If Harvey can stay healthy, I think that he has the stuff to be a dominant closer. I mean, his fastball is 100, 101 miles an hour. He's got terrific stuff. The problem is he's unfortunately seems to get injured every single year, but hopefully he can stay healthy. And I think that if he does stay healthy, that he definitely will be a quality back end of the bullpen guy for us. I think we have another one that we actually traded in the Britain trade. We got a pitcher named Dylan Tate, who was not a productive starter in our system, but they moved in the bullpen, and ever since he's been a great like 8th, 9th inning guy in the minors. So I think that he's another guy that might end up being a quality back end of the bullpen pitcher for us. And we got Tanner Scott, who last year showed flashes of being a really good stuff pitcher that we could use in the 7th or 8th inning. So I do think that we got some guys that could close out some games for us, and we have an offense that can score a bunch of runs. So the starting pitching holds up, we could have a decent, maybe close to 500 season. I don't think we'll get that high, but 74, 75 wins I could maybe see.
Hey, it's better than 48 or 49 wins that we were contending for a couple of years ago. So, anything's good. I want to ask you one last question before we get rolling, and then maybe we'll get back together again after opening day, and we can take a look at how spring training was and how opening day went the first couple days of the season. But I do want to get your opinion on this. If you think back, and I'll allow you to start at the beginning of the Andy McPhail era to now, who is the one or two prospects that you're most disappointed the Orioles didn't get to reap the rewards from? Whether I'll put it to you this way: who's the one player who had success elsewhere, and who's the one player you thought was going to have success and never developed?
Obviously, Josh Hader is probably the one prospect that we traded away that for Bud Norris, who was
just, it seemed like a good move at the time.
Yeah, but just kind of like a back end of the rotation starter, which has been in my opinion, all that we've been trading for since 2008 is just these back end of the rotation starters.
4
and 5s. Yeah. The one guy that I probably thought would do well that really didn't do too good that we got in return. Honestly, I wouldn't say any of the pitchers. I mean, I didn't really think that guys like Norris would do well. I didn't think that Giovanni Gallardo would do anything. We gave up a draft pick for him. I guess maybe hitting wise, I thought that Trumbo might do a little bit better than he did. I mean, he's the guy that had consistently hit 30, 35 home runs before we got him. And he had the monster year, the first year that we got him. But after that, he was just injured. Fell off. Yeah. So Trumbo would probably be the guy that I thought might do a little bit better than what he actually did do here.
What about some of the homegrown prospects we had, whether it, Brian Mattis or even, I don't know if this guy's homegrown, but I feel like for the entire McPhail era, all we heard about was Felix PA and how this guy has 5 tools and he's gonna just have patience. He'll get there, and we're still waiting. Is there anyone from that group, whether it was Brad Bergeson, Brian Mattis, any of those prospects you really thought had an opportunity and just never got over that hump?
Brian Mattis, I think, is the guy that I thought was really going to be good, but I think the problem with him is that they rushed him. I mean,
Yep.
he was up in the major leagues after he had only thrown, I think, less than 30 innings in the minor leagues. And I think that they rushed him and it kind of ruined his career getting him up here, which I like that we're kind of taking our time a little bit more with these guys that we have here now and properly developing them so that we can hopefully have guys that perform when they get up here.
Yeah. Yeah, Brian Mattis is the one that always stands out to me. I think the one player in my entire fandom as an Oriole, I remember going all the way back to 97, the year the Orioles went wire to wire. They drafted 2 guys in the first round. One was Jason Worth, who turned out to have an outstanding career, just not in Baltimore. He did have a lot of success with Philly. He had some success with the Nationals, never with the Orioles. And he wasn't even the guy I was excited about. I was always excited about Darnell McDonald. And do you remember Darnell? Because the big thing on him was the fact that the Orioles actually got him to sign a professional contract, and he gave up playing football at University of Texas. And the guy, very highly rated first round draft pick and never fizzled. So that to me is my Oriole prospect that 24 years later has still never come to fruition for me. I think he made it on a little bit for a little while. Like he had a little bit of a major league career, like kind of more as a utility guy, but never lived up to the hype of that first round pick.
Yeah, and we had a lot of those back in those days between him and like Jeffrey Hammonds and all sorts of guys that were really touted highly that never really did much. Ben McDonald,
Manny Alexander.
Yeah, Manny Alexander. List goes on.
Remember Jerry Hairston Jr. and who's going to be the second baseman of the future, Hairston or Brian Roberts? And Roberts wanted, and then we paid him, and there went that.
Yep.
So we made the right choice because Hairston never really did anything after that. But you're right. Jeffrey Hammonds is a big one because he had all that success in the 1992 Olympics. He had a good debut with the Orioles in 93 and was doing pretty well early on, and then got injured and never was the same again. I mean, the injury bug just followed him for years.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of misses. And we drafted Billy Rowell in the year that we could have had Tim Lincecum and all sorts of stuff that just...
Was that 99 the one and only Frank Wren year? The year Frank Wren was here with 4 first-round draft picks and not a one of them turned into anything?
Yeah, I mean, we could go on for forever about the Orioles mishaps before McPhail took over.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I liked the Frank Wren signing at the time as GM. Who knows what would have been because they ran him out of Dodge real quick for oh God, who was the other nut that they brought in for that couple years?
Sid Thrift.
Yep. Sidney Thrift, and boy, for 4 years he ruined the franchise. You went from Pat Gillick to Frank Wren, and at least Frank Wren grew up in the Atlanta Braves system and was a prodigy of John Choleritz. And then we give Sid Thrift 4 years to basically ruin everything that Roland Heeman, Gillick, and Wren maybe had in place. And then it kind of got a little bit interesting with Flanagan and Beatty, and then Flanagan and Duquette. And then they moved Duquette and Flanagan, or Jim Duquette, that is, and Flanagan out when they got a chance to get McPhail. And Flanagan, God rest his soul, obviously, I know that had a lot of impact on him. Hopefully this is it. The last question I am going to ask, and I know I've said that 3 times, but this is going to be the absolute last one, and then we got to hit the road. Rafael Palmeiro. Was Palmeiro at this point, has he been like unfairly ostracized from baseball, or is that pretty consistent considering you don't really see much Barry Bonds either? But is Paul Marrow ever going to sort of get a swan song, or did he made his bed and now he has to sleep in it type thing?
I personally had no problems with the guys that were doing that. I mean, that's kind of everybody at the time was doing their thing with the steroids and whatnot. And I think Palmero for the times he had a heck of a career. But I also understand that there are people who are gonna have a problem with that because they feel as though it's cheating and whatnot, and people just they don't like the steroid users. Although I would personally put all of them in the Hall of Fame. I'd put Palmero in. I would put Roger Clemens in. I would put Barry Bonds in. I'd put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame.
I mean, put them all in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, heck, we could have a whole episode just on that. So, I do want we are going to wrap things up, Walt. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Like I said, my first baseball guest ever, and I knew we talked about doing this a couple years ago. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do it. If there's anyone I know who knows baseball and loves baseball, you're at the top of that list multiple times. You were even a couple years ago, I remember taking people to baseball games just so they would go to baseball games, and then it gave you a chance to hang out with them. So I know your love for the sport is at an all-time high, and I really appreciate you taking some time to come and share your knowledge with us.
It was great to come on. I had a great time, and I would love to do this again sometime.
We'll definitely do this again sometime. And for everything going on with Word of Josh, I've got some exciting things coming up, some exciting pivots that we're going to take. We're going to be focusing on some coaching and coaches over the next several weeks. We're going to have Walt come back after opening day. We're going to have Rugao and Frederick come back and talk a few more things. Then we got a couple other things coming up. So lots of good stuff coming up. Lots of focus on coaches and coaching and developing. So a lot of fun stuff coming up. So Walt, great having you on. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. And I will see everybody next week. Thanks for tuning in to Monday Night Josh on Word of Josh.